thanks very much for everybody to join this session room here, where we are talking about digital innovation and how it transforms agriculture. And I'm very happy that I have three main speakers here today, which are giving impulses, and we then afterwards will start a discussion and try to identify how we transform agriculture based on digital innovation. For the discussion, I will repeat this later on again. For the discussion, I would like you to write your questions into the chat. It's much easier than when people speak up, so then I can just summarize the question and hand it over to the podium. Nevertheless, please you can also write questions into the chat during the presentations. And I would now like to ask Achim Walter to start. Just to introduce Achim shortly, Achim is, sorry, Achim again, a strange breed of a physicist and a biologist. That's a great basis for digital innovation in agriculture. Achim was working for quite a while in Heidelberg, then came here to Jülich, and now he's a professor at the ETH in Zurich. And I would now like to hand over to Achim for the presentation. You can share your screen.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Uli. I think you already see my presentation. I try to switch the slideshow on, so now you should see the slideshow. Thanks a lot for the invitation and for the introduction. So my talk is entitled Digital Innovations for Sustainable Agriculture. And of course, if we talk about sustainability, you are all aware, and I don't need to rehearse the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are the aim to which these innovations need to be aligned with. But the crucial questions I would like to call out are how can we sustainably feed the world in view of rising demography and spatial constraints? How can digitalization and technology help in this endeavor? And how to realize this in different agricultural systems and regions. And this has to be reached for all three dimensions of sustainability, for the social, economic, and environmental dimension. And of course, this is very important to me, the way how to reach this is difficult. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. In German, we have the words, not the word jack of all trades, but eierlegende Wollmilchsau. And these eierlegende Wollmilchsäue only exist maybe in the car industry, and I doubt that they really exist there. So whenever you deal with agriculture and more sustainable solutions, you will see that the situation is very complex, that you need different solutions for different aspects of any challenge that you're working on. And there are very intelligent papers that have been written on this, and solutions need to tackle very individual situations. Overall, most people I'm in contact with think about agriculture in terms of the industrialized agriculture in countries of Europe or the Americas. And if I want to come down from the jack of all trades picture into a bit more detail, then there are, of course, huge challenges, and solutions need to take into consideration how we can decrease or at least consolidate livestock production, how we come to a less intense, more diverse crop cultivation, and how we can impose a smart use and development of technology like biotechnology, but also the technologies that we are discussing today, digitalization, sensing, robotics, image processing. All of these approaches are required for agriculture to become more sustainable. And I would like to point out that we are only discussing a very small fraction of the possible ways to the solution. And this needs to be very coarse, of course. Also, another important point I would like to make in my introductory statement is that we have to be aware that we co-developed with our food. It took about 10,000 years, but only started about 10,000 years ago, that we domesticated certain plants and animals. And only since then we have the lifestyle, the differentiated societies, the high population densities that we see these days. And for most of these 10,000 years, there was only a very moderate development of technology. Until about 100 years ago, situations on the field still didn't look very different from the very early days. And only in the past 100 years, we have seen an explosive development of technology, breeding technology, and of human population density. You're all aware about this, but this is something that's very important to understand, that the crop systems that we developed, that we see on our fields today, only became so powerful and became capable to nurturing the large fraction of the human population that we see today by modern technologies, by breeding technologies, and by the intensity of measures that we do these days in agriculture. And I think the central challenge that we have to work on, if we want to speak about general terms, is that during the past 100 years, we have learned how to produce more as a human global society. And for the coming 100 years, we need to be ingenious to be more efficient. We need to learn how to produce more efficiently. I think if there is the need for a central dogma to be given in a short phrase, it is this dogma that we need to be more efficient with our systems. This holds true both for developing countries, for the global south, and for industrialized countries, although in the global south, the issue at hand is very, very different from the issue at hand in the countries where at least we speakers are living in. But also in the global south, the digitalization, the new technology that we see with the further development of computers, of machine learning technologies, of communication technologies, is finding its way and is improving situations. About 10 years ago, lots of research projects and lots of down-to-earth initiatives have been starting to use communication technology like cell phones, smartphones. Today, we see sharing economy, we see sharing services depending on rapid communication, like we know it in our countries from Uber taxis. You can order tractors there. Things like this are beginning to be used. And we are seeing first uses of drones, of sensor technology, also used in developing countries. So I'm convinced that the solutions that research is developing in industrialized countries these days will find a spillover also to developing countries. And these spillovers will happen in two different sets of technologies. That's what I would like to advertise. The first one is a very rapid approach with precision agriculture. Precision agriculture is based on the principles when, where, and how much input is needed. High-end technology is developed to make agriculture more efficient, to apply intelligently things only where they are needed. And the second very important thing is to improve crop breeding. This is a medium-term approach. This does not improve agriculture within the next months, but it is important to have germplasm of our most important crops and of new crops, of new crop systems that are coming up, like with mixtures or with niche crops that can play out the improvements of technology, be it CRISPR-Cas technologies or technologies that help to make these crops better. And this is already almost my last slide that summarizes the most important things I would like to say. We have a certain block of challenges like excessive use of pesticides, fertilizers, novel pests, climate change, soil compaction. And the way how we can tackle this with technology, image processing technology, artificial intelligence, and statistics, either in crop breeding or in precision agriculture, is that we have to evaluate pictures, that we have to better understand where to apply how much of a certain input on a field in a given situation. This can be done with more classical machinery. It can even be done by hand in settings of the global south, or it can be done with more automated, fancy machinery. There is a lot of research going on in this realm, and this research, and that's the last point I would like to make, needs to be transdisciplinary research. That means not only us researchers should come up with ideas how to develop intelligent solutions, but we need to do this in communication with the farmer, with the consumer, with the authorities that can put regulations into place. That's what I would like to give as an input to you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Karim, for this very great introduction to the overall field and the challenges and the needs which are there. We would, I think we go through the 3 impulse talks first. So we would then immediately switch over to Tony. I would like to introduce then Tony Bridmore. Tony, and that's a kind of red thread going through this session, is also not a learned agronomist. He's a computer scientist, and Tony is working very closely with biologists and agronomists. And he will talk about affordable in situ phenotyping of cassava roots with deep machine learning. Yes, thanks very much, Tony. We can see your slides. That's good. You're still muted. Still can't hear you. Okay. But in the meantime, everybody can do lip reading. That's good.
No, don't lip read because you don't want to know what I was just saying. Okay.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. So I wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Achim said and focus on a particular example, I think. Uli says my background is in computer science, and particularly image analysis and machine learning. And I wanted to highlight the possibilities for using these sorts of technologies in smaller farming situations in developing countries, rather than just in the larger mechanized farming systems that we see in the Northern Hemisphere. And give you an example of one of the projects that we've been working on as to show you what can be done. So you might have seen the editorial in Nature recently talking about an increased focus being needed for smallholding farmers. And we've been working with CIAT in Colombia to try to address one of these problems. So we've been looking at cassava roots. It's a difficult problem for agriculture in that the cassava root has a very long and variable growth cycle. So it can take anything from 8 months to 12, 13 months for a cassava root to become food, to bulk up and change from the fibrous yellowy sorts of roots that you see in the picture to the thick red ones that gradually grow and become food. And this makes it very difficult for the small farmers. If it takes longer for their crop to mature than a single rainy season, then they lose a huge amount of their production. And the variation in it prevents any sort of industrial scale cassava production. So this is a food that feeds more than 10% of the world's population, but it's still grown in small farms, often by single people and small families. So the biological challenge is to find strains, to find cultivars that will bulk up early and reliably within a rainy season. And to do that, they need to have the computational digital tools to provide the information they need so they can identify those things. So the challenge that we had was to produce phenotyping tools that could be applied where cassava is grown. So the first thing we did was we built a low-cost phenotyping environment. This is an aeroponic system made of very cheap materials, costs virtually nothing, and can be put together all around the world. It's been trialed already in South America and Africa, I believe. And it will allow people, scientists in these countries, to produce cassava roots and take images of cassava roots in a sensible, affordable way. What really interests me, though, is the idea of how we process these images once we've got them. So we take a machine learning approach, like many people now. And in that approach, the standard workflow is capture an image data set, annotate it. So you're telling the system what it is you want to extract from the image. You may be drawing in red over the wheat ears in that picture. You then design your neural net architecture, which is the hard part. Train the network up with the test data you've gathered, the annotated data you've got, test it and deploy it. And if you're looking at things like cassava farms in South America and so on, the deployment isn't easy. You don't necessarily have the high performance computing technologies that we have in the West. Okay. So to run through what we did, we with CIAT gathered some images. We gathered around 500 images in their facility in Colombia. and they annotated them, which basically means they took the images in the top of this row of pictures and they colored in by hand the routes that we were interested in. Okay? Obviously something that takes some time. We provided them with some very low cost, simple software tools to help with that. And they still couldn't do very many. So they did about 500 images. Okay? We then designed our network architecture. So the goal we were aiming for here was to be able to do first fairly simple phenotyping and just count the number of storage routes in each image. So we took the image on the left and designed a neural network architecture that we could put the image in and have a count come out the other end. What we discovered was that there's quite a lot of variation in the way that these routes appear as they age. And we struggled to get a single network to do the whole job. So what we did was we designed an age prediction network that would decide whether this was a young root or an old root, and then we put those through two separate paths, so you can see here. Yeah? So we have two different sorts of networks. Two of them are different, two of them are the same, yeah, and are trained on different ways of doing it. We still decided that we needed more data. Yeah, we were trying to do a counting task, so we wanted to put the image in and get a number out. So we needed training data that had every possible counting result in. We couldn't find those in the images. They just happened not always to appear. So we automatically generated some. We used a thing called a GAN, a generalized adversarial network, which will generate images, yeah, from test data. So with this, you basically show it some real images and it learns a mapping from an initial data set to a real image, a fake image. Yeah? So we showed it our root segmentations that we'd obtained from a set of real cassava images, and we got it to learn a mapping between those two things so that we can now put our image in, we can generate a fake image from it, yeah? And then the second part of the network tries to get this to, tries to figure out when we're faking it. Yeah? So one branch generates fake images, the other branch tries to tell whether it's a fake or not, and they learn together, fight each other, and you end up with a system that's really good at generating images. So these are some of the images that we created, and hopefully look fairly realistic. The networks work fairly well. Yeah? We can tell young roots from old roots fairly well. Sometimes it thinks old roots are young, but not very often. And we managed to get counting accurate to 71% with young and 86 with old. Yeah? And this is now being tested in field trials out in Colombia. So we could do this, okay, to a certain extent in an early part of the project. We wanted to make it affordable though, by which we mean we wanted it to run on very low cost computing devices. And we took an approach known as separable convolutions. So these neural networks are taking little pieces of image, little arrays of image, and processing them. And they do this a lot, many of these array operations. If you take a square picture that's 5 by 5, you've got 25 bits of data you're working with, 25 multiplications every time you apply it, and that can blow up and become a huge number. Separable convolutions are a way of splitting this up and doing the same operation in two one-dimensional convolutions. And we built our networks so that they would only learn those. And we tested it on a variety of different data sets, and we got it running on an old Samsung mobile in a few seconds. So basically what this is an example, I hope, that it is possible to run the sorts of machine learning techniques that people get very excited about now on low-cost devices in countries that are less technologically developed, perhaps, than the areas that are developing the methods. Okay? So you can take these modern deep learning methods and you can use comparatively few annotated training images because you can generate others using the same sort of technology. You can use things like separable convolutions. There are other methods as well to simplify the processing needed and to get these things onto low-powered computing hardware. And we hope when the trials are completed, we'll be able to provide better evidence that they can support research and breeding programs in these countries. And if we can do that, what we can do then, hopefully, is to make life a lot easier for the smallholder cassava farmers and give them some greater stability and hopefully get them into new food production processes. And I couldn't resist showing the last picture. This is what we're working on now as part of the same project. Instead of counting the objects, we want to pull out their three-dimensional structure from a single image. And we didn't have any cassava roots, but we have managed to do it on that banana. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony, for giving that example, how digital innovation has also focused on countries which are less highly equipped with technology. We will then move on to Jennifer. Let me just shortly also introduce Jennifer. Jennifer is bringing another dimension of digitalization for the big data aspect, statistical background. And she will give her perspective from the US perspective on digitalization in US agriculture. Jennifer, it's on, it's working. You're still muted.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So I would like to bring in a perspective from the US, and I appreciate both Occam and Tony's comments. I'll try to refer to them as I'm speaking. So the issue in the US is that US farm sizes are continuing to increase, which means we have more acres to manage with less available labor. So if we want to emphasize sustainability and resiliency, our farming community is very, very interested in those areas. So we don't have to convince them it's important. We have to work on providing them the information that they can use to drive their management decisions. So what we've been focusing on are cloud-based, data-driven decision support systems, as well as automated solutions. We see that as critical to the future of agricultural production. As you can see in this graphic, nearly every aspect of the cropping system today can be digitized. So that goes from planning, pre-planning, in-season processes, managing irrigation, fertilization, planting, harvesting, spraying applications, all the way to tillage and then the spring cycle. So we have this very complex decision cycle that farmers are facing every growing season. And fortunately, with the adoption of digitization and automation, we can collect more data and try to find the value in that data for the farming community. So here's an example of some of the work is there. We've developed an automated system for decision support in nitrogen application using center pivots. So if you're not familiar with the center pivot, it's basically a circular irrigation system. And so we have nitrogen that can be injected at various pivot points. And this is all monitored with computational systems so that we can get as long as monitoring how much nitrogen is applied. We can also process the data that's coming back from the cropping system, process the impact on the field, measure the amount of nitrogen that's been applied, and then make recommendations in the future. So this has potential environmental benefits. As Akka mentioned in one of his slides, there are ongoing discussions in the US about the application of fertilizer and impact on water systems. And so the smart management of applications of nitrogen is of critical importance. What I wanted to highlight here was that partnerships between industry and public entities are very critical to the transition of innovative methods to practice. As Akka mentioned, that the farming community is heavily tied in with industrial processes and industry, and that is also tied into policy decisions about farm management on a broader scale. So those partners all have to work together to make these kind of systems work. So I wanted to highlight the importance of plant phenomics in these systems. So for those of you not familiar with phenomics, it's the collection of measurable plant traits, whether visible to the eye or invisible. As someone with a statistician background, measurable is key to me. If we're not measuring, I'm not analyzing. So I like the idea of measurement. And the phenomics enables the full utilization of a lot of the research that's been done in genomics. So I was really looking at the connection between genotype and phenotype, aimed at addressing critical social needs, whether it's global food security, environmental sustainability, or the shortage in our agricultural labor forces. So our goal is to stimulate advances in agricultural technologies and also emerging data science, as Tony talked about, by collecting measurable traits and then working backwards to try to figure out how those traits have come to be and which ones are economically and agriculturally important. So we use plant phenomics to connect foundational plant sciences with agricultural practices. So coming from a university environment and also working with industry partners, we see the importance of foundational discoveries and our role is mainly to work to translate those into practice. And that drives a lot of the technological innovation in the US ag system. So you can see here, we have foundational science, we have applied research. We try to connect those through the data systems and through genotyping, phenotyping. And that also drives innovations in our agricultural technologies. What do we need to measure? When do we need to measure it? And how does that play a role in decision support systems? So I wanted to show you the phenotyper's pyramid. This is thanks to one of my colleagues, which is these layers of information that it's research and breeding, it's plant populations, doing experimentation and trials, collecting the data, which is where a lot of the phenotyping systems come in, whether you're working in industrial ag settings or smallholder farms. It's quantitative measurement, linking phenotype to genotype, and enabling decisions. And you can see on this pyramid that, as Aka mentioned, this requires expertise from many different disciplines working together in a team interdisciplinary approach. So the challenge in some sense to the research community and the practicing community is that we have to learn to talk to each other across disciplines and backgrounds to make these systems work. So I wanted to highlight one more example, which is a digital solution for nitrogen that involves phenotyping in the field. So farmers are always looking at choices where you have to optimize cost and benefits. They want solutions that are economical so that they can be adopted and that are fast turnaround so they get the information they need to make decisions in a timely fashion. So the purpose of this project was increase farmer profitability, decrease the energy use by optimizing nitrogen application, and reduce the environmental footprint for agriculture. So this is involving nitrogen stock sensors in the field associated with variable nitrogen rate maize trials in Nebraska. So those of you not familiar with US geography, Nebraska is right in the center. And most of the state, as most of the Midwest, is agriculturally focused. So this is maize trial in Nebraska, bringing together engineers from Iowa, which is one of our neighboring states, also very agriculturally focused, with Nebraska agronomists and plant breeders to measure nitrogen in the field, how much is being applied, how much is being taken up by the plants, so we can associate application with use by plants and optimize fertilization use. So one last thing I wanted to mention was we have a project that's funded by the United States Department of Agriculture. It is intended to bring together the crop and livestock communities around genome to phenome, so connecting genotyping to phenotyping. One of the challenges we have in the US is that the crop and livestock communities are relatively siloed, and they speak among themselves, but they don't necessarily speak to each other. And they're facing similar challenges in linking genotype to phenotype. So the idea was to develop a shared vision in this space, identify research needs, opportunities, gaps in methods and technologies by working with not only academic partners, but also industry partners, nonprofits, and global organizations. And we have a method to fund seed projects in this space to enable researchers and industry partners to scope out parts of the space where we need to identify and face challenges. And we're going to communicate and disseminate all of the findings. So this is a open project in the sense that anyone can join. And it has an emphasis on communication as well as training. So workshops and webinars and publications. So as I said, anyone can join. This project just started a few months ago. So we're in the very early planning stages. And we are emphasizing in partnership with the USDA, our partner organizations and global engagement and stakeholder organizations. So if this is a space in which you're interested, I encourage you to go to the webpage. You can sign up for our listserv, and we will share with you the activities that are related to this project. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for giving that perspective from the US and also the openness for the open projects, which I think is very important. And we will probably come back to that question of how to interact between different parts of the community later on. So before we go into the discussion between us and also with the groups, with the audience, which is actually increasing more and more, which is good. Please, audience, if you want to ask a question, just put it into the chat. I will then summarize the questions and put them to the speakers, and we can also discuss this in a more broader sense. So please put it into the chat if you have a question there. We already have some questions, which we could probably start with. So there was one question actually from Jennifer to Achim, where she asked, could you expand on the role of niche crops in the future for digital agriculture? Would you like to comment on that, Achim?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. The entire field about which we talked right now is very much focused on major crops because these are the crops where we can get research money for. So it's a bit difficult if you want to come up with any project on a strange small niche crop. Nevertheless, these niche crops are very important because they often have less pests and diseases, and they are the ones with which you can catch the heart of the consumer, because there are always a lot of people who would like to drive a change in agronomy and who are willing to spend more money from their private budget on such niche crops. And you also find farmers who want to push certain crops. And therefore, I think it would be great if we as researchers could also have an eye on developments from our world that can foster the further productivity and the further acceptance of these niche crops. For example, Tony showed a concrete example about how you can investigate root systems in crops. This is something that is applicable probably to a lot of crops. And if we can help pushing a niche crop that would be interesting for nutrition in certain regions, then I think this would be helpful, although we could not publish very highly on it. But I think it's our obligation to not forget these crops and to work along with consumer organizations on such crops. I hope that this answered your question and that this was somehow substantiated for you.
So probably short additional question on that. So niche crops. It's probably not niche crops, but if you look into horticulture, horticulture is highly technicized already today. So how would you see the differences there, or the opportunities which can be used with horticulture in that context?
Yeah, sure. In horticulture, you have a wider variety of crops, and you have a high value of these crops. So very early on, if you're marketing salad or peppers or whatever, you have a higher value for the individual crop. And if you do management of that crop in the field, the costs for a robot doing mechanical weeding instead of spraying will pay off, and therefore lots of the developments that we see in automation are especially progressive in horticultural crops. When it comes, for example, to mechanical weeding or to automated harvesting, these are things you see in apple, you see in salads, and in kind of expensive vegetables, where you can get around to a certain degree on the pesticides that have been used conventionally over decades.
Okay, thanks very much. There is a whole cluster of questions about barriers. We talked about you talked in your impulses a lot about technology. There might be barriers to address or take over that technology in the more industrialized countries. There are probably other barriers in less industrialized countries. So would you probably also as a group like to a little bit discuss about what the barriers are there to bring these novel technologies into practice? So probably Tony, would you like to start on it? What's your main topic there?
So I think for the sort of things that I was talking about, there are technological barriers. Jennifer put a question in about edge computing and delivering our sort of machine learning stuff through that. I think the problem is with a lot of the places we were looking at, they were a long, long way from the edge of a network, right? And the idea that you could work to a server was still rather difficult. So you have to get it to work on a local device. So that's one technological thing that's being addressed. Oddly, what seems to be happening is that it's being addressed by people who have very specialized large-scale things that generate huge images. So if you have an X-ray machine or a laser ablation tomography system working in your lab, it produces monster images that you can't possibly put onto a machine. So you have to find onto a normal computer. So you have to find a way of making it lightweight. And in doing that, you find the technologies that you need to be able to do the cassava thing on a mobile phone, because it's the same kind of problem. So there are technical problems. I think there's around machine learning at the moment, there's a kind of a cultural problem. I think we need to convince people that it's not magic, right? It's just different to what happened before. And it's a strength and a weakness, really. If you're developing these sorts of machine learning things, it needs a different engagement between the computer scientists and the plant crop scientists, the users of the system. A few years ago, it was quite common for people to come to my lab and say, can you write a piece of software that will do this? Right? And give us a specification for a piece of software. And then we would find a solution and send it back to them. Yeah? With machine learning, we're still having to find a technical solution by designing a network and so on. But there's a closer interaction between the computer scientists now and the plant people, in that the annotation of the data needs to be done by someone who knows what they're doing. And it's often not done as a one-shot thing. So we're finding now we're getting into a dialogue with the biologists where we're showing them how it works and saying, okay, give us some more examples then, right? And the conversation, nature of the conversation has changed. So there's some technical stuff. There's also some kind of cultural things around expectations and the way people interact with other disciplines.
So this is probably about communication between computer scientists and biologists, scientists. So how to actually get these digital technologies out to farmers or to breeders. That's probably another step of cultural difference which has to be overcome. Anyone to comment on that?
I think so. Yeah, I think the breeders in the UK at least need to be convinced that it's worthwhile for them to do, yeah? Because there's lots of things that can be done, yeah, but you've got to make it economically viable and you've got to sell it to them. So we have a system running now with Syngenta, which is kind of related to the cassava stuff, I guess, in that Syngenta employees are taking images out in the fields of things like sunflowers and uploading the images to our server. And we are counting the number of seeds on the sunflower head and sending the number back. Okay? Syngenta know it's worth their while because they understand the technology. Convincing a farmer that it's worth his or her while to do this is difficult, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, I think there's some convincing to do.
Yeah, I would add to what Tony is saying that one of the approaches that we've used for reaching out and engaging farmers is kind of twofold. One is we engage with farmers that are connected already with the university system. So we know that they're at the edge and they're interested in trying new things. They're running test farms, essentially. We use them as kind of a beta testers for new stuff. At the same time, we engage with our commodity boards. So this goes back to what Achim was talking about, how we focus on major agricultural crops. That's because that's where the money is. So we talk with our soybean commodity board, our corn commodity board, wheat commodity, and engage those boards and explain to them what we're trying to do and use them as sort of an intro, an entree into those farming communities. So we host joint events where members of commodity boards come and join us, represent farmer associations, and explain to their members sort of what we are trying to do. And then that starts sort of the communication between the research community and the farming community by using these commodity boards as kind of.
Okay, before I would ask Achim about that dimension, how this probably would act, because what Tony and Jennifer just described is probably more in the industrialized countries. So how do we actually get technology over in less industrialized countries and less industrialized farmers? That might be a different challenge. So I'll give you some second to think about this, Achim. Before, I would like to just ask the audience, if you have more questions, just put them into the chat. We can then summarize them. I see some more of them, but there might be more coming in. So Achim, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, sure. A lot of my colleagues here at ETH Zurich are only doing their research in agricultural settings of the Global South. And what they report is that it is very important to be on the farm with the farmers, to initiate transdisciplinary projects from the beginning on. So to live with the farmers, to listen to the farmers, also to bring students to the farmers. We have one class where students are traveling or have been traveling before Corona times to Ethiopia and to Kenya, and have been interacting with the local people, understood their needs, understood the soils that they have, understood the cultural issues that they have with often being either a crop farmer or being a herdsman. And things like that need to be understood before you can start developing solutions, before you can start really targeting issues that are at hand in these countries. I saw in the chat that someone asked for how to reduce food waste. The issue is completely different in our countries and in those countries. There's food waste everywhere, but food waste in our countries means as a consumer of having filled up your fridge too largely, and in developing countries it means that you don't have a transport chain. and that you are not very well aligned with the market and how to deliver things. And in these issues, also in developing countries, communication can help a lot. So setting up systems that help farmers to do to set up networks on their own. This is something that has been very efficient in several countries. I mentioned very briefly this Uber-like project that helps farmers to get to a tractor when they need one by simply posting a message that they would be willing to spend some money on a tractor today or tomorrow, and the ones who possess tractors can give their offers in these networks. So you really need to be down to earth and be together with the consumers, with the citizens with whom you want to interact. And that's the last buzzword I would like to give here. But and also Tony has been involved early on in citizen science projects. So the way to reach out with our technology, with machine learning things, is to, for example, pose challenges like data annotation challenges, challenges that take a look into which level of biodiversity do we still find on fields, by simply letting the ordinary citizens who are interested about that roam around with their eyes or with their smartphone cameras, take pictures of situations, if that is allowed, if the farmer lets them take pictures on their fields, and evaluate situations, rate situations, and help with annotation of pictures like all of us do when we are solving one of these challenges before we can place an order, whether this is a chair or whether we see a car here. By this, we are helping industry to get better machine learning algorithms for detecting cars or detecting chairs in situations. And similar things, similar processes need to be set up for agriculture and food production, where the interested people can help refining machine learning methods, and then also situations for niche products, and in countries that do not have an industrialized agriculture can improve. That's the way how our methods can diffuse also in countries where the agricultural system is much poorer and where completely different challenges are at hand.
There's probably rather common than an answer than a question from Clara, where she says, unfortunately, ITC infrastructure and literacy among farmers in developing countries could be very limited. I think that's definitely a limitation, which already has been addressed here before as well. On the other hand, we have our own experience here that, for example, with respect to smartphone availability, that's a very available source and instrument in the global south, the less industrialized countries. And if you look at the compute power which is in the smartphone today, this is enormous. And if we can use that and utilize that, we can have a lot of opportunities there in bringing ITC infrastructure directly, because they have the infrastructure for that. And I think that's a good opportunity which is there. There's another question there. Could you provide examples on how digital innovation is helping to save local varieties, agrodiversity, and increasing climate resistance? Do you think that a public investment is enough for this kind of research and extension? Anyone want to comment on that one?
Well, my research is taking place mostly in industrialized regions. So I'm not the expert on the funding situation of research in the global south, but from what I can observe, it is possible. We have a huge project at ETH Zurich funding research activities for transdisciplinary projects in the global south. We have had a lot of research going on for decades with professors, with scientific groups interacting in the global south. It's just that the problem is so complex, because if you want to increase biodiversity with any given crop, you need to be specified on the crop. You often need to specify the solution for a given subregion. So therefore the successes are not as easily visible as they would be if you work together with one of the big agtech giants, where you have a huge impact very rapidly. That's why in the press and for lots of the grants that we are competing for, these industrialized settings are more prominent. but I know of very many colleagues who do this research with local variety improvements in countries of the global south. But this is groundwork that needs a while to take off. You will not find a silver bullet in one crop in one specific region and being able to expand that to a lot of different situations. But you really need to do a lot of work with individual farmers, farming organizations, countries.
Okay, thanks very much. I just would like to pose a last question, because then we have to go back to the plenary. We mostly talked now about the digital innovation in the primary production sector. But if we look at also the resource use efficiency, or the crop use efficiency, which was also mentioned in one of the questions, this is not only the primary production, this is the entire chain. And there was already a mention of a waste. But do you have examples where we use digital technology beyond primary production, so to couple within the chain, or to address the avoidance of food waste in the later parts of the chain? Does anyone want to comment on that one?
So it's kind of not my thing, but I have seen examples of people trying to use machine learning to predict what will happen further down the chain so that they can plan for it. But I think that's probably been going on for a long time with different technologies.
I do know of some projects. I've been involved in some, particularly in the dairy industry, with milk production, and doing modeling from a risk analysis perspective to try to predict spoilage conditions for milk, so that this is after collection, but prior to distribution, working with milk facilities to try to reduce spoilage. I'm also aware of, since my home department is food science, we also have projects working in raspberries in South America, where post harvesting, doing careful screening and checking conditions to try to avoid bacterial spoilage prior to packaging and shipping. And that can involve sensors, disposable sensors. That can involve more sophisticated screening and sampling processes to try to do early detection. And that involves the digital side. From the data collection side, you can use imaging in those systems to try to image for early infections, early spoilage. And then also you have to use technologies then to do backtracking and back sourcing. So if berries are arriving and seem to be particularly prone to spoilage, then you can do tracing back through the transportation system to find out the potential source of that contamination.
Mm-hmm. Distribution networks, like Jennifer just described, are very important. There are lots of startups these days who work based on that technology. And one example I would like to make is that in food industry, there is a lot of development around so-called digital twins. These are simulations of fruits, for example, that are shipped from over the ocean. And by having a lot of measurements from sensor networks, you can better understand how these fruits ripen and develop during the time when they are shipped. And so you can optimize these processes based on a lot of modeling results and based on sensor technology that you place in one of these cardboard packages where your bananas are shipped with for weeks over the ocean. And these digital twin solutions are, to my mind, the best use of a lot of the modern computing power to improve processes also in food technology. But there is a lot to improve still, as I said, startup companies. So one of these barriers is also that more startup companies should be funded in that realm. not more of the same with the big players, but be innovative, start doing citizen science projects and involving with startup projects. They come from the base. They are transdisciplinary in their own realm.
Okay, thanks very much for all this great information. If there are no further questions, I would now like to thank again the speakers and for the very lively discussion, for the great input which you gave. We will now have to summarize things and bring it back to the plenary. And as I saw just with the left eye, the plenary room is filling slowly. So they want us to meet there again 5:10 German time. In roughly 5 minutes. So if you want to go back there, please be welcome. And then there will be a summary of the breakout sessions there. Thanks very much again, and see you there, and stay healthy and safe. Thanks very much for everybody.